I'm going to begin with you, Stephen, partly because is the first name on the list. You're the money here. You're the checkbook. There's a lot of vendors here in the audience, but you're the guy buying the stuff, and that gives you an interesting perspective. Can you share that with us?
Thank you for that introduction. I usually like to think of myself as the customer, not just the checkbook. But I'm also unique on this panel because I'm the only one who will admit that I don't know anything about the Internet of Things. I actually had to look at when they wanted us to come talk at the conference, and we'll understand why, is because we are the customer. But I really don't know about the Internet of Things. I don't really want to know about the Internet of Things, nor do the people who are primarily my tenants and residents, except for the students at Masdar Institute and the employees of the technology companies who are active at Masdar City, who do know quite a bit. But I do know what I need from the vendor, from the supplier, from the partner. And I got a few things here. First off, it has to work. It can't be light boards on a conference room. It can't be half a solution. I have a personal frustrating technology story that I bought a tablet, Bluetooth keyboard, and Bluetooth mouse from the same technology company, one who has a booth here. They can't connect. You don't want to spend 4 hours connecting your Bluetooth tablet to your tablet, your Bluetooth keyboard to your tablet. Second off, open platforms and connect it to data. So in the past, we'd have a BMS system running a building. Buildings have had BMS for years, building management system, lets people down in the dark dungeons understand what's going on in the building. We have, in a couple instances, entered into contracts for a BMS system and then said, great, now let's pull the data and understand our energy management across the city. And they said, oh, no, you didn't buy that package. You bought the BMS hidden in a dungeon, not connected package. That's no good to us anymore. Every sensor we put on that's connected to the internet needs to be available to us. And not only that, it needs to be connected not just to, I think that's going to be, that is going to be a bit easier. Sorry for the first part. But everything we buy needs to be connected, available to us as the city manager, but also in a new way to the end user. So if we want to drive a more sustainable lifestyle, we don't just need building management systems that tell somebody in the basement how much energy we're using, or tell DWA how much we're using, but make it public to the city, but also in a user-friendly format that tells the end user how much your office is using, how much your apartment's using, in a way that they can consume and contrast. And this needs to be done in a consumer way, not just an industrial way. And we've had issues because many of the companies that we're dealing with here, you see the booths out here, or the big names, Siemens, General Electric, JCI, Honeywell, great companies, good products, but not consumer companies, have a very difficult time taking that data and saying it comes out of the dungeon where we've been using it, and now we're putting in an app to a smartphone or a tablet that can be used by everyone who has an apartment there. And that leap is a hard one. I'd say the next one is solutions. We need full end-to-end solutions that work, such as that. It needs to come with, so if your data package comes with, or sensor, it needs to come with the app that works, with the app to the consumer, with the right information to the right people. Business models that work. Since we talked about me as the checkbook, we need a business model that works for us. It needs to be affordable, it needs to drive value, it needs to drive information, it needs to work for you. You can't provide, we've become accustomed to so much being free on the internet because we'll look at a little ad. The Internet of Things doesn't really work that way. Somewhere in there, someone has to charge. We need partnerships. A lot of companies come and say, we want to be your partner. And what they really mean is we want to sell you a lot of things. We'd like you to write a big check, not a little check. That makes you a true partner. But partnership means some of the business models around energy saving that work in the US and Europe just aren't implemented here yet, or only on a very minor scale. Financing that's available in other parts of the world or in your country's home office, in companies' home offices, are just not available here yet. There's not that trust, there's not that business model here that works for both sides as well as it does in other parts of the world at times.
Going to have to ask you to wrap up in 30 seconds or so, Stephen.
Yes, and the last one is options for consumer security and privacy. I think that we need to be given that. The consumers want that option. How much benefit do I get? How much do I give up? And to have different tiers of how much information I will give you in exchange for what.
Thanks very much indeed. Magnus Karlsson, if I can turn to you, Director Advisory Services at Cybercom Group. You say that we need to plan how to live with an unsecure system. I mentioned that a little bit earlier on, that we need to live with a little bit of unsecurity, learn how to live with an unsecure system. It's a scary thought, but I guess it's an important one. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
Thank you for asking. We believe that Internet of Things will be the end of this IT security as we know it today. It's no doubt about that when we talk about the things that will come in millions, there will be a high price pressure on the suppliers on those. And of course, it will be hard for them to implement total security in it. It will be impossible. So we somehow need to work with risk management and say, this part of my IT system is I can live with, I need to live with that, it's less secure. This one I must secure 100%. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're a facility manager or a manager of a smart city, and you decide to introduce 10,000 lights in your city, in your premises. And after 6 months, 1 year, a security breach is discovered in this distribution. What do you do then? Well, do you replace them all? Do you update them over the air, or do you do nothing? And the answer could be any of these three, as long as you have a strategy for it and you plan for it going forward. So we mean that the only thing you can handle Internet of Things security is that by doing this by compliance testing all the system, be prepared, have a risk plan, manage the risks. In this case, because you will be hacked, and some systems will be hacked. So that's our take on it.
And so as a follow-up to that, what would be your practical advice to the guys we heard from yesterday morning who are really driving smart city Dubai, people like Ahmed bin Hamdan, people like Ahmed bin Bayat? They don't want to hear phrases like, you will be hacked. They don't want to hear things like, you have to live with unsecure, because in many ways they're politicians, and things don't play out well on my radio show or the front page of Gulf News.
Well, when you look at where you introduce security breaches, it is the systems, it is from the suppliers who implement the systems for you, and it's in the people that uses the system. And we believe that you need to educate and help all these parts of the system, and that's how you handle the risks. You handle them continuously outgoing, because you will add more and more systems to your organization and to your operation. And it will be impossible to do a one-time shot, as the topics of this idea swap is so accurately pointing out. It's not a one-time shot.
Thank you very much indeed. Cherif, if I can turn to you, please. Cherif Sleiman, the General Manager of Infoblox. Previously, you've worked with some of the big global technology players. Nortel's on your CV. Senior position at Cisco, so you've seen it from a smaller company perspective and a big company perspective. And you say the thing is management solutions, managing the devices. There's a great quote from you that I'm going to throw at you. And you say having the proper tools to simplify governing, auditing and managing the underlying complex infrastructure is key. So you've got to take something that is complex, the infrastructure, but you've got to simplify the management of it. How do you do that?
Yeah, thank you so much. We heard earlier.
In fact, and a word to all of our speakers this morning. The acoustics are fine in here, but we are competing with speakers at another conference next door. So yeah, we haven't got doors, so we can't close the doors. We could send the boys round to shut them up, or I can ask our speakers to hold the microphone really as if you're eating an ice cream. So you can almost taste the microphone.
Here's a shout out. Can you guys hear me? All right. We heard earlier that one of the very first things that, one of our big customers would say, it has to work. It has to be a utility. Today, when we actually flip electricity on, you don't really care where the breakers, you don't care where the wires is. Just you flip the switch on and light comes on. You open a tap of water.
Hold it closer, Cherif.
And you actually get water out. You don't care about how the plumbing is and where the water source is. So today, one of the very important things for our business models and the opportunities that we're actually seeking in this industry trend to take place is to fundamentally understand that the factor of complexity for the traditional infrastructures, and specifically when it comes to security, is going to be profoundly very different and an order of magnitude higher. Having tools that can fundamentally auto-discover all the devices that need to connect to make that business model work, make sure that only the authorized devices can actually connect, ensuring the integrity of communications between machines to machines, as we saw earlier, making sure that you're protecting against malware and rogue logic that may come to actually take advantage of a specific business model is really clear. And also, we cannot really highlight or underscore enough the need for IP version 6, which all of us in this room, as professionals, customers, or vendors, need to be preparing for, because the number of devices that will be actually coming online is absolutely nowhere near can be supplied by the IPv4 today that has pretty much kind of completely depleted. So, one of the things that we're partnering with many of the people in the room here is providing not only the awareness to take the infrastructure for granted or to actually evolve the infrastructure, but more importantly to actually make sure that if we're going to actually get to the value and the monetization, that we don't really continue to underinvest in the tools that actually take care of these things.
And a final quick word. You've worked for some household names, the Ciscos and so on. Now you're working for a company that probably isn't a household name. How challenging is it from an almost entrepreneurial perspective to convince Emirates Airline, Dubai government, Unilever to go with a solution for something so critical with a name that perhaps isn't so familiar?
You highlight actually a pretty tough journey that we had to go through over the past year and a half. Infoblox, despite obviously it's a niche and a small company, it is a market leader and owns over 55% market share in the DDI space that we play in. However, today, if we were to count, the top 200 or 300 customers, they are the household names in the region. And these are the organizations like Emirates Airlines, some of aspects of the big energy companies, or some of the big government players in the region that have started to actually see early on the challenge, because they're the early adopters, they're the innovators. So I believe that securing those and actually seeing the value that we could see, or developing the case studies to demonstrate the difference that we're making, hopefully will trickle down as more of our colleagues come online and adopt some of these new trends. But yes, it is difficult to educate and create that change.
Thanks very much indeed, Cherif. Dr. Srdjan, if I can turn to you, the CEO, also the co-founder of Dunavnet. First of all, my apologies for butchering your name. So perhaps you could begin by introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about Dunavnet. And then I want to ask you about smart agriculture, because you've just won an award for a smart agriculture initiative, and I think that's really interesting.
Okay, thanks. So the name is Srdjan. That's the proper pronunciation, but the way it's spelled, I'm sure that nobody can read it properly, so no worries about that. I'm used to it. I'm a CEO of Dunavnet. Dunavnet is a small company. This is our first time that we are here. And we have been working in the IoT domain for, I think, 8 or 9 years, so from the very beginning, and when it started to be focused on in Europe, and have been working in different mainly smart city related projects over the years. And the smart agriculture project that you just mentioned is about irrigation. So there was an open call for proposals in Europe, and there were 269 actually applications. We won the award for the best proposal, and we are working now on implementation of it. We have some more details at our stand. You can feel free to come there. So it's about optimizing irrigation, using sensors, using weather forecast, using some mathematical modeling of the soil structure, of the sugar beet, and mixing it all together in order to optimize the way you irrigate the crops.
We have on the next panel someone who has an application, for want of a better word, that deals with weather. So maybe we can get you two guys together a little bit later on. I mean, but more broadly, that's one example. You say the Internet of Things will have a significant impact on both businesses and also society. It brings many benefits, but also many challenges. Philosophically almost, and this has been a recurring theme this morning, we can do everything, but what should we do? How do you address that?
Definitely. So there is a huge potential of IoT, and the range of applications that we can build using IoT is really horrendous. And I think the more these devices or smart things we get connected, the more of new applications will pop up. Some of the applications that we don't even think of, even some of the applications that we have today now using IoT, they were not imaginable maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. And the more of these things start to be available, the more of the applications will, the more new, exciting and unexpected applications will appear. But the problem with it is that they all bring different challenges. Security is obviously one of them. If you have these thousands, millions, trillions of the devices, just physically securing them, it will be impossible. Then you have communication, and then you have to deal with that. Then the IoT also brings, so the business models behind IoT applications are not really straightforward. I sell you a device, you sell it to the other one, and that's it. It has to be some sort of ecosystem, and there is a huge focus actually in Europe on creating ecosystems. So you have now, European Commission is supporting an alliance for IoT innovation, which is bringing together companies like Telefonica or IBM, and companies like my company or SMEs, bringing them together in order to have this complete value chain and to have all these different components built into the complete business model that's really different than the current one.
Finally, 30 seconds. You talked about surprising and exciting. Surprise and excite us. What are you going to win an award for in 2017?
Oh, okay. One of the requests that we got was to detect bad smell of the food coming out of a restaurant and to inform police about that, so that to stop producing such bad smells. So maybe that's one of the interesting things. But one example, which is actually a good one, is about pest control. And we got recently, for example, a request to detect the activity of the rats, of the mice in the buildings, and try to identify where is it happening so that people can go and actually deal with it more focusedly.
Fantastic stuff. Science fiction, but science reality. David Hoelscher, if I can turn to you from Huawei. When it comes to the security question, I really like your phrase. You have to make sure that security is designed in rather than bolted on. Tell us why that's so important.
Okay, thank you. And it's really great to be here. I think I want to kind of stand on the shoulders of some of my predecessors. There was a really
David,
good
if I can ask you, hold the microphone.
Okay.
I mean, almost so you can touch it.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now?
Brilliant.
Great. I kind of want to stand on the shoulders of some of my predecessors. I think there were some very good analogies and problems brought up. And the one I want to kind of stand on is plumbing to begin with. So I think in IoT, we expect certain services, just as mentioned, that we expect water to come out of the pipe. But on the other hand, we're kind of a convention of plumbers here. So most people aren't interested in the details of the plumbing, but from making sure that plumbing is reliable, secure, works all the time, there's a lot of standardization, even in an industry as simple as plumbing. And so I think that's a very important aspect of IoT as we move forward, both in services that are on demand when we want them and meet our customers' needs, and also that we can add additional security I don't think we can ever get rid of security concerns. I agree with you on that. And I think utility or happiness, like we're doing in Dubai, is a good guide point on where we make a security trade-off. The previous speaker brought up the fact about airplanes with connectivity or without, and most of us chose airplanes with connectivity. And so that's, I think, a good guiding point.
Another point you make, which I think is really interesting, is standardization. Let me find your comments on that. You say we need something, standardized infrastructure and platform is the necessary approach. And you also go on to say we have to enable entire ecosystem members to develop their own applications. Everybody has to play nicely together, don't they? Particularly from Stephen's perspective, as perhaps the customer. He wants everything to work together. He may want to get some stuff from Huawei, some stuff from Infoblox, whatever it may be, but it's all got to speak a similar language. Is that possible, or is that just naive optimism?
I think it is possible, both in the long term and in the relatively short term. So in the longer term and more stable orientation, we're working in 3GPP and standardizing these technologies, both in the access network, the core network, and even in the data center. I think also, very important, we're working with industry consortiums, and those move faster, and a lot of times they have the big players involved, and also smaller enterprises as well. But that's where we can bring new technologies to bear faster. So I think it's important to have both standardization bodies and also industry collaboration.
Well, let's get a show of hand on this. It's a really broad, general question, and it's a yes or no question, but have a stab at it. Yes or no. Do you think in the next 2 years we'll have a workable, standardized system or platform for the Internet of Things? I know it's an oversimplified question, but I just want to get a sense of the mood in the room, including our panelists. First of all, who thinks yes? Glasses on or off? I don't see many hands. Okay, who thinks no? Okay, who's got any ideas on how we could fix that? Okay, if you have, we'll come to you in a second. David, thanks very much indeed. I want to turn now, Anthony, if I can, to you. We heard from you yesterday, the perspective of Dell. You're the Internet of Things business developer. Give us your perspective on this.
I think, from the point that you're making before in terms of, it has to work. I don't care. I don't know anything about IoT is a really good point to make. And I think that's where you start to look at the different viewpoints that we're hearing about today, about how you start to think about the infrastructure you have now. So if you consider you have IT infrastructure in place to manage a city, it exists right now. So that's the information technology. And then you've got this operational world that's starting to converge as we see it converging. And that requires a form of new companies that we have trying to figure that out. When you converge that, you start to exist infrastructure that there is today. There is potential to maybe reach that point in 2 years' time that you just asked about. I think it's important that you leverage what you have now. Cities today have infrastructure they can leverage from information technology. Technology companies such as Dell, HP, Lenovo are coming from a different angle. So consider that other companies are coming from the machine-to-machine world. There's a different viewpoint. And as these two areas become converged, there is a perspective that you do need to then find this standard and regulatory that begins to provide a framework for which you to work together. So I think a lot of it's there, but in terms of the security that comes with it, it's paramount. I think enterprise-type operations today are very, very focused on security. So if you can extend your security that you have today from your enterprise into the IoT world, there is a platform to begin to work on now. If you can secure those endpoints with that infrastructure, you have a platform to start securing stuff.
Another point you make is about analyzing the data, because that's when it becomes valuable. And you talk about sensors. You say organizations typically send sensor data directly to the cloud for aggregation and analysis. That's what they do, but find that it's expensive. This is overwhelmed. And you give an example, which I really like, of a temperature reading. Now you've got devices that are constantly sending out the temperature reading every second, minute, or whatever, when actually you only need the data when something changes. So we need to have less data at source, which I think is an interesting concept. Explain that to me.
I think there's difference of opinion about how you use that data and when you send it. I don't think necessarily we have the right opinion, but I think you need to look at how do you possibly set up the right solution for the right environment. And so from my point of view then, if you were to send every bit of data from sensors, because a lot of that sensor information is useless. Is it on? Is it off? Is there any point in sending that to the cloud? Probably no. If you can start to look at your environment where you're managing in terms of a remote location and start putting a gateway there that does an analytics locally so you can do the edge compute, then you can start to make more sense of real-time decisions. I had a conversation today with a journalist and talked about oil and gas on the platform. To think about satellite communication, you can't do real-time cloud compute with big data and analytics through the cloud from a satellite connection. So you start to look at that environment thinking, how do you help that environment automate, become smart in an offshore environment? So you do need to put and think about where you put your operations. So I think it really comes down to the type of environment you're working in. Yes, the consumers comes into it, and for instance, any wearable will talk all the time to the cloud. Certainly in a commercial environment, oil and gas, marine, industrial automation, there's a need to look at local analytics and edge compute and save on sending data to the cloud where there's a high cost, there's potential security risks, and therefore look at a different way of distributing your computing.
The idea, basically we're talking about security all the time and there is concerns. You spoke about Moore's Law yesterday morning. So there's a wave of sensors and technologies that are going to come through us. The sense of security is being balanced against convenience, savings, etc., etc. The standardization piece, who is going to make those standards and who is going to review threat perceptions? That's a question.
That's a question. Okay, who wants to have a stab at that? Who's going to figure out the threat perceptions? Magnus.
Yeah, very good question. It's a very good question. I think that you can't trust that someone else will do the standardization that in security that works for you or your organization. I think you need to work with that internally yourself. I think you need to take whatever things you can use from the standards that we have today, 27001 for instance, and you need to add your own policies to that. Meanwhile, the community works with the standardization and come up to a level. Because the innovators in the Internet of Things won't wait for standardization. They will run, they will keep on running. And you as a responsible for the security and the operation internally in your organization, you need to cope with that somehow. The only thing you can do is continuously check your security levels in your organization, in your systems, and do it over and over again.
Thanks very much indeed. Let's take another idea from the floor. Yes, please, sir. Gentleman over here again on the front row.
We have got a brilliant panel sitting out here. Really appreciate for arranging them to be here sitting all together in front of us. And we have got a creator of the city, Mr. Steve Masdar. We have got the implementer of IoT, and we have got the security panel who's trying to make it secure as well. But at the same time, I was just wondering, looking at the Masdar City, Mr. Steve is trying to create a city which is on reducing on the carbon footprint. It's basically a city of the future, but a thing of the past, where we had less of the carbon footprints in the world. And at the same time, we have got technology experts who is
let's get to your question. Time is pressing.
Yeah, it's basically pushing on the IoT. So I'm just wondering, with the IoT and the security, are we pushing it too hard? It may be applicable to certain industries.
Steve, take that one. IoT and some of the environmental benefits, but are we pushing it too hard?
I guess the question is really around IoT and what it can do. You were very right in a lot of things we're trying to do, reenact ancient cities. Well, how would we master plan this if there was no air conditioning? So our environmental platform starts well before we get to the building level. It starts with the master plan, then gets to the building level and talks about the facades, then the MEP, and finally the last part is really the IoT and the management of the city. To me, the IoT comes in for how do you operate, not for how you build. You have to build in the right sensors, the right communication, but then I don't think we're pushing quite hard enough yet. I think that one of the things that you talked about was data and data to the cloud. That's not just data to the cloud, that's data to the user. So exception-based reporting. One of the examples was we had 6 buildings and we were getting just boatloads and boatloads of data on the energy consumption. It wasn't until we actually got it in a usable format and started a comparison. It says, we have a real anomaly in one building. They can't possibly be using twice as much as the other 5. They weren't, but the sensors were not set up right. The BMS system wasn't working properly, but because the data was overwhelming and there was no one there to read it and understand it, which happens too often, that you have a great system set up, but even we struggle with long-term operations of what we put in, that the data didn't get to us in a way we could use it. And the Internet of Things is great, but it's got to be usable.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll take one more idea from the audience. We're out of time, so a short comment, please. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is for the gentleman from Dunavnet. You were telling us about smart agriculture. Now, smart agriculture, how do you propagate it in a country like India, where illiteracy is a major issue in rural areas, and it is an agriculture-based country, so you have a huge market for smart agriculture over there?
We'll have to use energy renewable resources, so solar panels to power up the sensors in the field, and after that, once it comes to the cloud, then it's not a problem.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. A great question and a great response to finish. Thank you very much indeed to our panelists. Really appreciate your insights today. Let's show our appreciation. Gents, you can go down, grab yourself a cup of coffee, a croissant, if they're still there. I think they are. And we continue with our second idea swap today.